When the first Kingdom Come Deliverance came out in 2018, it was a pretty big hit, and I fell in love with that title, playing it from start to finish, not even on record. I just wanted to get through that story. But it wasn't perfect, and as much as I appreciate the first game for being a very succulent teat for me to get as much content out as possible, there were things that I had issues with, and I know the community did in general. So, since we've got Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 coming on the very near horizon, I thought I would sum up some of the most important things that I think KCD has to change, they have to fix, and some of this is also just preference, do keep that in mind. First of all, I need to talk about the storytelling, because for starters, I think the story in Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 was okay. It's very clear and very obvious that they didn't quite do what they wanted to. Of course, being a smaller scale title, they had to confine themselves to some extent, tell a limited story in a limited time era with limited characters and a smaller setting. That's very much not the ideal situation for Warhorse Studios, and in fact, in developing KCD2, they've come out in saying that they actually wanted to do this at the first game, but they just didn't have the budget for it. So KCD2 is going to be what the first game should have been when it comes to scale, yet a continuation of that story. But my biggest problem is actually just the fluff that was within the Kingdom Come Deliverance story. From start to finish, you play as Henry, going through these tales of meeting characters and quests. The main storyline focused on trying to get your father's sword back, but actually those missions were very few and far between. Aside from the missions of you getting kidnapped and being put in a camp and having to escape, or sieging Talmberg, there was actually very few in terms of big story moments. One of my favorite ones that I do remember though was from the beta, taking out the first bandit camp, doing a raid there and fighting Run to the top of a tower, or of course setting up an ambush yourself to take out some lads that were walking along the road. These were great moments, but in between them I think a lot of people have forgotten how much chaff there was. I mean, my biggest example was in the last mission, just before you go and siege Talmberg, you're building a trebuchet, and whilst you're waiting for it to be built, you have to ride all the way back to the monastery, go to the gardens, and pick some goddamn flowers. Then also talk to Bright and Blessed as well. It was an interesting mission that felt like it was nothing more than padding out runtime, and there was quite a lot of stuff along those lines. The important missions like hunting, which taught you how to use a bow, or learning to read and write, were fantastic. Meeting people like Hans Capel and Teresa were really good in terms of character development and actually moving the story forward. But there was so much in between it, whether it was just taking out small bandit areas, going and collecting resources for peasants, or just delivering messages. Whilst these are just staples of open world games, I feel like Kingdom Come Deliverance, because it's trying to tell this narrative, should be bigger than that. It should focus really with the missions of storytelling. Any side missions that come in should be based nothing but either teaching you mechanics or introduce you to the people in the world around you, whether it's the blacksmith's daughter or the tavern owner. Maybe going to find the baker, or of course going and learning alchemy with the witch. I don't think canonically they're actually a witch. This is supposed to be historically accurate. However, I don't want to see any more fluff. I'm done with fluff. I don't care about padding runtime. Make the game a couple hours shorter, but have a really concise and tied together story. I think the biggest issue with Kingdom Come Deliverance was also its greatest strength, and this was the realism. Having the world move around you whether you were going with it or not. But what this did is meant that you'd also be waiting for things to happen. Yes, perhaps realistically to real life, but unfortunately with games, fun always has to come first. And I do remember towards the latter end of the Kingdom Come Deliverance story, it did really start to drag. Once again though, I think a lot of this was down to, well, the smaller budget. And this brings me on to one of my next points that I think was a gripe with a lot of people. And I actually put up a post on my YouTube channel asking for your guys' opinions, and this was something that kept coming up. Bigger battles. I remember in the first initial teasers of Kingdom Come Deliverance, there was a huge open field battle that people really wanted to see. Even the beginning cutscene where Skalitz is being attacked, you can see a huge army coming, but there are no huge battles within the game. The most you get are bandit camp raids, or of course the small ambushes that I talked of before. In terms of big battles, the Siege of Talmberg is the closest we really get, but even then there's no more than 100 or so people on the screen at once. This was something that I think a lot of people were disappointed with. Barely? I don't really know. I think to expect something huge from a first-time game was a bit optimistic. But now this is definitely something that is going to be within the second game. And we've already seen it within the initial teasers and trailers. Should I be misled? Maybe. I mean, thinking about it now, the initial KCD1 trailer showed big battles, and we didn't get that in the final game. However, in Gamescom, we will be getting 20 minutes of gameplay, and I'm thinking a lot of this will be based on the battle stuff. So hopefully by the end of August, we will actually have a confirmed idea of what's going on, whether we're going to get these huge battles that we've always wanted. The first Kingdom Come was doing as much as they really could with the game engine, but now they've got the more resources, they've got more time, and they've got a better vision and people behind it to work on the game. I think it's way more likely we're going to get something huge. Not just fighting alongside your troops, but having command functions as well, in order to be some sort of leader or captain within the army. I mean, so many comments that I've seen here are talking about having actual battles that don't just feel like small gang-sized sparring sessions. And actually, Warhorse came out, and Toby, specifically the community manager, talking about how in Kingdom Come 1 you were part of small skirmishes and quabbles between bandit and leaders of thieves, but now in Kingdom Come 2 it's going to be based on lords and kings and the battles and arguments that go on between them. So we do have confirmed bigger battles. Speaking of combat, though, there are going to be additions like toggleable helmet visors, you know, being able to put them up and down. This was something in the first game that was a little bit annoying because I wanted my favorite helmet, but it kept pushing my visor down and I couldn't see anything. I understand that is the risk and reward of having better armor. However, this is going to be something within the next game that will be able to be changed and toggled. The other thing is the combat itself. It was so divisive at the time because, I mean, how do you make combat that's realistic but also fits within the time era? Kingdom Come 1 really based on the solo 1v1 duels, which was fine when you were playing in tournaments and arenas, but then when you started to go out into the wilderness and you were fighting against groups of bandits, it became incredibly difficult to actually fight them properly because you'd lock onto a target, you'd have your number 4 or 5 directions of combat, and then that was pretty much it. To try and switch targets would be a bit buggy and it would be incredibly annoying. You didn't get that smooth flowing combat I think Warhorse were actually going for in the first place. Did they get some things right? I definitely think so. The chambering and parrying looked cool. It looked really slick and flowing. And once you get the hang of it, it does feel like you are this medieval knight and that complete badass in the world. But until that point, there's so much more that has to go into it. I think a lot of people coming into a new game and not really expecting the realism that KCD offered didn't really get to grips with the combat system. The reason the Mount and Blades combat works so well is because it is so easy to understand, yet there is a massive amount of headroom for getting better and better and better to the point where you can be a really elite player in terms of combat, but still have a fight against someone that has only just started. That kind of combat system is done to perfection, and I think Kingdom Come 2 probably needs to take another look and refine it. But it also goes a little bit further onto that AI, because fighting the AI, oh my god, it was some of the most horrible stuff in the world. I actually came across this, and one of the reasons that I wanted to make this video was in my previous video, I was capturing some gameplay of a tournament in Kingdom Come Deliverance, and trying to fight against that AI in a 1v1 situation again, oh my god, it was so awful. I was pretty much just waiting for counters. If I went in for an attack, every now and then I could get a hit on their armor, but most of the time it'd be blocked or parried and they'd do a counter against me. So the only way to do it was to, well, counter them. Wait until they attack and do something back. But the AI would be locked in so hard that they'd take about 20-30 seconds before they do anything. So it'd be two people just looking at each other while circling in this sandy arena. It looked absolutely ridiculous. I think most of this was just down to the focus on realism rather than actual fun. Because there's a lot of times where combat can be satisfying, but I've never experienced, or I'd never say the combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance is fun. And I think that is an issue. And I think that's something that should be addressed. The archery itself, I think, is better than sword fighting. Not because it's actually more refined, but because it's so much less consequential to the game itself. You can pick and choose if you want to use a bow or not, and in fact, I think most people just leave it to the side. But maybe it should be something that's addressed more. I think automatically adding in something like a crossbow will change the way that projectile combat works. Not just having bows that are incredibly inaccurate, but having a crossbow that will have some sort of sights that you can look down. And, well, the whole invention of the crossbow was to make it so much easier for anyone to pick up and use. And I think that's going to really play into Kingdom Come 2. So I'm really glad they're going to be adding that in. I'm going to just have a small mention to lockpicking. I think it's something that's been so over talked about. Look, we know lockpicking was awful in the first Kingdom Come, especially before any of the updates came out. It was almost impossible on console. Now I think it's actually okay, and using a mouse and keyboard is fine. I think they just need to make sure that they're addressing that when it comes to the console versions of the game. Let's talk a bit about on-horse combat. Riding around in Kingdom Come was very fun. Your horse, it jumps over stuff, it feels slick, it feels fast. I think their horse riding mechanics are really well done. Fighting on horseback, awful. Because the whole game has been based around this lock-on combat when you're on foot, as soon as you jump onto horseback, of course you can't do that, but it means the game doesn't really know how to handle it. Trying to time swings, trying to even get your body in the right position almost seemed impossible. And I think it was nigh on useless. Dismounting and fighting on foot was pretty much the only way to do combat in that game. So making it actually more usable within the game mechanics itself would probably be advantageous to Warhorse if they're trying to make people go down that route. Not only that, but because we've got 2 maps and, well, the game's much bigger in general, I think, well, cavalry combat's going to have to be a focus. They're going to have to look at that and see what they can do. One thing we know is going to be in the next game is blacksmithing. I think it was a bit of an interesting plot point that Henry was the son of a blacksmith, but we never actually get to do that within the game itself. However, many of these things are automatically going to be upgraded just because of the more resources that they're going to be putting into the game, whether it's the double-sized map or more characters coming back in. The combat that's going to be overhauled, and of course things like adding in different weapons like maces and of course crossbows, even adding in guns. I mean, hand cannons is going to be an incredibly interesting sight to see how they balance that and how they make the mechanics work. I will preserve judgment until we get a final look. However, I think this final comment sums it up perfectly, and I think the only thing that needs to be added into Kingdom Come 2